My mother came from Sneem. My grandfather was Thomas Hussey and my grandmother Helena O'Leary, and they owned and ran T.P. Hussey's shop in Sneem. Though I was born in Kerry, I grew up in Dublin. My parents started their married life in Castle Gregory, and we moved to Dublin for my dad's new job. My earliest memories are of summers and other times spent with my grandparents in Sneem, in the shop, and with my uncles and aunts and some cousins. I worked in the shop. I'm sure I was an absolute nuisance and got in the way, but I always felt welcomed and encouraged and enjoyed it hugely. The shop was a long, narrow building, and it had two seemingly endless polished wooden counters with an aisle going down the middle of the shop. We had groceries on one side and clothing, or what was referred to as drapery, on the other side. There was no such thing as self-service, so tea and sugar in those days were delivered in huge wooden chests. The job of the shopkeeper, i.e. me when I wanted to, you'd have to weigh the bags on the shop scales using these enormous, iron weights to balance, and then you'd sellotape the packet for the customer. Job done. Another particular job at that time was milk delivery. Now in those days in the shop, milk was sold as loose milk, which means it wasn't coming in bottles. There were no cartons in those days, but rather stored in the shop in a container. It was cool down there and it was covered so that no insects could get into it, and people would pop in with their own containers to get milk, or I would deliver to one or two people in the village. I was always hopeful that I might get a sixpence or the odd threepenny bit for doing the job, but that never happened. I know that I developed a real understanding and appreciation of the importance of T.P. Hussey's and the other well-known stores to people who were living and farming outside the Sneem environs in the time before cars and even telephones came to Sneem. I do remember when the first telephones were installed, and you'd ring the post office and you'd turn the handle on the phone and say your number and you'd be connected. That shows how old I am, actually. Many years later, when my grandmother and grandfather had passed, my aunt Nuala Hussey took over the running of the shop, and it always became known as Nuala Hussey's after that. She had the biggest selection of sweets and confectionery that I have ever seen in any one shop, and it was a very popular place for people to go. She also trailblazed the way back in the 70s when she started to stock Adidas trainers, and I can remember particularly that orange with black stripes and blue with yellow stripes were very popular in those days, and the shoes were canvas at that stage and not leather. My siblings and I relished the freedom we had around Sneem. We'd get out in the morning, nobody was dragging us out of bed, we got up when we wanted to, and we'd be out all day just exploring and engaging with the village life and the countryside, and we'd pop home when we were hungry, basically. But one summer, I remember, we children were told that we were all going to take a trip to an island off the coast of Kerry in a boat. So I don't think we were that impressed at the time, because part of the fun of our summer holiday was going out in Uncle Mick's boat, where we would fish for mackerel and pollock, travel back to Dleask, back to the Coral Strand, picnic on Shirky, or just sail around Kenmare Bay on a nice day. So the thoughts of going to another island offshore in a boat were not that impressive, really. We took off on a summer morning in either 1973 or 1974, and saw the boat. We became quite excited because this really was a boat. It had a cabin, it had an onboard diesel engine, seating all around the side, lots of space, and our sense of adventure really started to get heightened. Docked at the pier or the quay at Skelligs, and we hopped out, and we children delighted in climbing the steps and clambering over the paths, and were totally intrigued, I remember, by the beehive huts. And Dad was explaining to us the history and the story of the monks who had lived there 1,000 years, more than 1,000 years before that day when we were there. And it did make a huge impression on us. We appreciated the amazing views, the bird life that we could see both there and on the smaller island. And as all good things do, the trip was coming to an end, and we made our way back to the pre-agreed gathering point. So the adults were gathered there. The boat was offshore. Nothing much seemed to be happening. The boat was there for a while, and the adults were talking. The children were getting restless, as children do. And eventually we were told that it was very unlikely that the boat would be able to come in alongside to pick us up, due to a combination of a very high tide and swells in the ocean at that point. So rather than alarm us, we children were absolutely excited about this. Staying on Skelligs overnight, oh my goodness, and immediately thought of the plan, or devised a plan to sleep in the beehive huts. They'd be ideal. We were wondering where we would get grass or the ferns or the moss or whatever you need to make a bed. We were having a true Enid Blyton Famous Five adventure. But reality stepped in, and no, we were not sleeping in the beehive huts. But one of the lighthouse keepers came along and ushered all of us up to the lighthouse, and were made very welcome. I have no idea what the name of the lighthouse keeper was, but that's a pity, because it was such an amazing experience in our time. So after a little while, he invited the children up to see the light in the tower. It was quite obvious that the lighthouse keeper was very proud of his work and the job they did, and he gave us a great amount of facts. Every lighthouse has its own lighting signal. So the candle power of the Skellig lighthouse is 1,800,000. And interestingly enough, I never forgot that, because Dad would always quiz us, who remembers the candle power of Skellig lighthouse? And one of us always got it. As the evening progressed, the weather turned better, and actually we didn't get to stay overnight on the lighthouse. But it's certainly an adventure that we all loved and realised was very special. So the boat came in alongside, picked us up, and I remember that the last bit of the journey was in the dark, which was a little bit scary, but quite thrilling at the same time. And we all made it home safely to tell everybody our exciting story. In reminiscing about this whole story and that adventure, I took to looking up some facts about Skelligs that I didn't know and weren't said at the time. In 1578, the island fell into the ownership of the Butler family of Waterville for a rental of 2 hawks and 16 to 18 stone of puffin feathers per annum. In 1821, the island was bought from the Butlers under a compulsory purchase order to build the 2 lighthouses on the island for a sum of £750, which in those days would have had the purchase power of around 109,000. So that was a huge gain in that period of time. In 1969, the helicopter relief scheme came in, where the lighthouse keeper was brought back to mainland by helicopter. Previous to that, the lighthouse keeper had to climb a derrick, which is a mast attached to the cliff on Skelligs Island, and dangle there until the boat came alongside and he can drop into it. I'm sure they were all thrilled to get onto the helicopter in 1969. In 1985, Charlie Haughey's yacht and he were rescued off the shore of Skelligs when his yacht went aground. In 1996, Skelligs was declared a World Heritage Site, and obviously so many people visit it today.